The Mission. This video is based on key insights from the book The Mission by Tim Weiner. Chapter 1, The Dark Horizon. Tim Weiner opens with a scene of George Tenet, the CIA director in 2001, feeling uneasy despite a peaceful view. Tenet knew a huge attack was coming, but he hadn't been able to convince President Clinton of the danger. He worried the CIA wasn't ready for what was about to happen. Weiner establishes this sense of foreboding right away, setting the stage for a story about a struggling agency. The author details how the CIA struggled after the Cold War ended. It had been built to fight the Soviet Union, and without that enemy, it felt lost. Former directors like Richard Helms believed America wasn't interested in having a strong spy agency anymore. The fall of the Soviet Union was described as a disaster for the CIA, like a huge meteor wiping out the dinosaurs. It went from being a vital mission to feeling like it had no purpose. Weiner explains that while the CIA had a history of secret successes, the public mostly remembered its failures. Presidents had often used the CIA for risky operations that didn't always work out. Truman originally wanted the CIA to simply gather information, but it quickly became involved in secret actions, like overthrowing governments in Iran and Guatemala. These actions created problems and damaged the agency's reputation. The chapter highlights several missteps, including the Bay of Pigs invasion under Kennedy, which was a major disaster. Even when the CIA succeeded, like during the Cuban Missile Crisis, it often struggled to accurately predict what the Soviet Union would do. Weiner points out that even the CIA's experts were wrong about the Soviet Union's strength in the 1970s, predicting they would surpass the US. Senate investigations in the 1970s exposed the CIA's wrongdoings, like assassination attempts and connections to questionable leaders. This damaged relationships with other countries and hurt the morale of CIA agents. Later, during the Reagan administration, the Iran-Contra affair, selling weapons to Iran and funding rebels in Central America, led to criminal charges and pardons. Duane Claridge, a key figure, believed the CIA was failing and would only be fixed after a major disaster. Weiner then introduces Tenet's arrival and his feeling that the CIA was on a burning platform, meaning it was in serious trouble. He had a plan to rebuild the agency, but it felt like the goals were always out of reach. Despite its problems, the CIA was still carrying out important operations, like capturing war criminals and terrorists. However, many overseas stations had been closed, and the agency was short on money and people. The author emphasizes that the CIA was struggling with outdated technology and a huge amount of information, making it hard to find important clues. It was like searching for a needle in a haystack. The agency's budget had been cut after the Cold War, and many experienced agents had left, leaving a shortage of skilled spies and analysts. There were more FBI agents in New York City than CIA officers working abroad. Weiner describes Tenet as a determined leader who tried to boost morale and defend the CIA against criticism. He was a relatable, energetic man who connected with the agency's workers. However, the CIA continued to make mistakes, like a failed operation against Saddam Hussein and accidentally bombing the Chinese embassy in Belgrade. These errors further damaged the agency's reputation. The chapter concludes with Tenet's uncertain future under the new Bush administration. He was kept on probation, meaning his job wasn't secure. Weiner foreshadows a coming catastrophe, hinting that the CIA's weaknesses would soon be exposed in a devastating way. The author notes that warnings about a potential, catastrophic systemic intelligence failure had been issued years before, but were ignored. Chapter 2, Denial and Deception. Tim Weiner recounts a devastating event early in George Tenet's time as CIA director, a moment that revealed deep flaws within the agency and set a pattern of deception. In 1995, the CIA, working with Peruvian forces, was running a secret program called Airbridge Denial, meant to stop drug smugglers from flying cocaine into the United States. However, the program quickly went wrong when a CIA-backed plane shot down an aircraft carrying a family of American missionaries, Veronica Bowers, her infant daughter Charity, her husband and son, mistaking it for a drug flight. The CIA had no proof the plane was involved in drugs and didn't even try to identify it before attacking. Weiner details the frantic cover-up that followed, led by Tenet and his team. They told the vice president, Congress, and the public that this was a rare mistake, a one-time accident in an otherwise well-run operation. But this was a lie. The author explains that this wasn't an isolated incident. Between 1995 and 2001, the CIA and Peruvians shot down 15 planes, violating clear rules set by President Clinton to prevent killing innocent people. These rules were designed to protect CIA officers from being accused of murder. Despite these rules, the CIA consistently broke them and then covered up the violations, from the jungle to the highest levels of the agency. A key figure in this story is José Rodríguez, who oversaw the Airbridge program. Weiner portrays Rodríguez as a risk-taker who didn't worry much about following the rules. He was later promoted to head the CIA's counterterrorism division and eventually became the agency's top spy. The author highlights that Rodríguez's willingness to bend the rules was well known, even earning him a reprimand earlier in his career for improperly helping a friend facing drug charges. Weiner explains that the CIA reluctantly got involved in the war on drugs after the Cold War ended, needing new missions. The Airbridge program was the result, but it quickly became clear that the mission, stopping drugs, was prioritized over following the law. A legal loophole was created, with a presidential order drafted by the CIA's lawyer, John Rizzo, allowing the shootdowns as long as specific procedures were followed. However, these procedures were routinely ignored. The author emphasizes the culture of secrecy and deception within the CIA. Officers consistently lied about following the rules, and the truth was hidden from Congress, the White House, and even internal investigations. When an independent review was conducted, the CIA deliberately misled the investigators, preventing them from uncovering the full extent of the wrongdoing. Rand Beers, who led the review, felt betrayed when he later learned the truth. Weiner concludes that Tenet chose to protect the CIA's reputation and his own position rather than reveal the truth about the Airbridge program. He allowed the cover-up to continue, setting a dangerous precedent where the mission was valued more than the rules and honesty. This event, according to Weiner, foreshadowed the problems that would plague the CIA in the years following 9/11. Chapter 3, It Was All Sadly Absurd. Tim Weiner presents a troubling picture of the months leading up to 9/11, revealing a significant disconnect within the Bush administration regarding the threat posed by Al-Qaeda. In early 2001, CIA Director George Tenet urgently warned top officials, including National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice and Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, that terrorism was a real and growing danger. He even drafted a secret order allowing the CIA to capture or kill Osama bin Laden, but Rice dismissed it, failing to see the immediate need or even present it to President Bush. Rumsfeld, similarly, believed the country faced no major threats. Weiner details how this lack of urgency extended to the leadership within the CIA itself. While Tenet pushed for action, Jim Pavitt, the head of the clandestine service, was more concerned with office politics and maintaining a comfortable lifestyle than aggressively pursuing bin Laden. He canceled planned missions and reduced training for operations against Al-Qaeda, frustrating those eager to take the fight to the enemy. Cofer Black, the counterterrorism chief, nicknamed the Hulk for his forceful personality, was determined to attack Al-Qaeda, but faced resistance from above. The author explains Black's plan, simply called the Plan, involved working with Afghan warlords the CIA had previously supported during the Soviet-Afghan War. However, these warlords were often corrupt and had engaged in brutal fighting amongst themselves, creating a chaotic situation. The Taliban, who had taken control of Afghanistan in 1996, provided a safe haven for bin Laden, and the CIA struggled to gather reliable intelligence on his location. Weiner highlights a missed opportunity in late 2000 when a Predator drone spotted bin Laden at a compound in Afghanistan. Despite having him in our sights, the administration hesitated, needing 6 hours to prepare a missile strike, time they didn't take. This delay, according to Weiner, stemmed from a lack of clear policy and authority. As the spring of 2001 progressed, the CIA received increasingly alarming intelligence about impending al-Qaeda attacks. In July, Tenet presented Rice with 7 specific warnings of an imminent attack, urging her to convene a National Security Council meeting to address the threat. Black forcefully argued that the country needed to go on a war footing. Yet Rice scheduled the meeting for September 4th, weeks away. Weiner emphasizes that Bush lacked a clear strategy regarding al-Qaeda, Afghanistan, or Pakistan, leading to strategic incoherence within the White House. He portrays Bush as initially disengaged from foreign policy and describes a dysfunctional relationship between Rice, Rumsfeld, and Secretary of State Colin Powell. Cheney and Rumsfeld distrusted the CIA, viewing its warnings with skepticism and even suspecting a deliberate attempt to mislead them. This distrust, combined with internal power struggles, created an environment where warnings were ignored and opportunities were missed, ultimately contributing to the vulnerability that allowed the 9/11 attacks to occur. Through his reporting, Weiner suggests a critical failure of leadership and a dangerous lack of preparedness within the highest levels of the U.S. government. Chapter 4: The Bay of Goats. Tim Weiner details the CIA's early planning for the 2003 invasion of Iraq, beginning in August 2001, revealing a focus on regime change that predated the 9/11 attacks. Louis Ruda, a CIA officer with a personal history tied to the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba, was tasked with building a plan to overthrow Saddam Hussein. Ruda's background shaped his determination to succeed where others had failed, fueled by a family legacy of opposing dictators. He discovered the Bush administration was already deeply invested in Iraq, with frequent discussions about regime change at the highest levels of government. Weiner illustrates how past CIA failures in Iraq haunted Ruda's planning. Previous attempts to support uprisings or build opposition groups had cost around $100 million and resulted in disaster, including a destroyed base and the deaths of recruited agents. Despite this history, Ruda was given the challenge of avoiding another public failure. He sought guidance from Frank Archibald, a veteran of successful covert operations in the Balkans, who stressed the importance of working with trustworthy individuals motivated by patriotism, not personal gain. The author highlights the contrast between the lessons learned from the Balkans and the existing situation in Iraq. Archibald's success in toppling Slobodan Milosevic involved a combination of intelligence, covert action, and military force, alongside a successful propaganda campaign. However, Ruda found the CIA lacked current intelligence on Saddam Hussein's regime, having lost its sources after UN weapons inspectors were expelled in 1998. The agency's efforts were limited to collecting phone numbers in case of a potential coup, a sign of how little they knew. Weiner shows how political agendas complicated Ruda's plans. While Vice President Cheney supported the idea of a new operation, Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz championed Ahmed Chalabi, an exiled Iraqi politician with a questionable reputation. Despite warnings from experienced intelligence officials who considered Chalabi untrustworthy, Wolfowitz pushed for a plan involving bombing Iraq and inserting Chalabi's forces to take control. This plan was dismissed by others as unrealistic, likened to a Bay of Goats, referencing the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion. The author explains Ruda ultimately developed a detailed plan, codenamed Anabasis, focused on rebuilding relationships with Kurdish groups in northern Iraq, gathering intelligence, and preparing for a potential military invasion. This plan involved espionage, sabotage, and propaganda, aiming to weaken Saddam's regime from within. However, the chapter concludes with a stark reminder of the CIA's shortcomings, as the agency was caught off guard by the impending 9/11 attacks. Weiner emphasizes the CIA had received numerous warnings about an impending al-Qaeda attack, but failed to adequately prepare, revealing a significant gap in their understanding of the terrorist threat. Chapter 5: The New World. Tim Weiner paints a picture of chaos and quick decisions in the days immediately following the September 11th attacks, largely through the recollections of those at the very top of the CIA and the U.S. government. The chapter reveals how little the U.S. actually knew about al-Qaeda despite years of intelligence work, and how that lack of knowledge fueled a frantic, often misguided, response. Weiner shows how officials, caught off guard, immediately jumped to conclusions, particularly regarding Iraq's potential involvement, even when presented with evidence pointing to al-Qaeda. The author details how Mike Morrell, preparing to brief President Bush on 9/11, had received no warning of a terrorist attack. This highlights a significant intelligence failure. When the attacks did occur, the initial reaction was a scramble for information and a desire for immediate retribution. Bush, despite being told by CIA Director George Tenet that bin Laden was responsible, repeatedly asked about Saddam Hussein's possible role, demonstrating a pre-existing desire to confront Iraq. Weiner emphasizes the speed with which the CIA began planning for war, even before fully understanding the enemy. John Rizzo began drafting orders for covert actions, essentially, plans for secret operations including capture and even killing, while the dust was still settling. This illustrates a willingness to bypass normal procedures in the name of national security. A key meeting at the British Embassy revealed a surprising divergence in strategy, with British officials urging focus on Afghanistan while some in the US were already looking towards Iraq. The chapter reveals a deep sense of guilt and fear within the CIA. Officials like Kofer Black openly worried about being blamed for the attacks, comparing their situation to the purges of generals during Stalin's Soviet Union. This fear drove a relentless pursuit of intelligence and a willingness to take extreme measures. Weiner highlights the massive expansion of the CIA's budget and personnel, fueled by a sense of urgency and a desire to prevent future attacks. Weiner illustrates the difficulty of separating real threats from false alarms in the aftermath of 9/11. The CIA was flooded with intelligence reports, many of which were unreliable, leading to a constant state of heightened alert. The anthrax attacks further fueled the paranoia and contributed to the rush to judgment regarding Iraq. The author shows how the CIA, under pressure from the White House, began considering assassination as a legitimate counterterrorism tactic, a move that raised serious ethical and legal questions. Through interviews, Weiner demonstrates how the initial strategy was to create chaos in Afghanistan, hoping to flush out bin Laden. However, there was little thought given to what would happen after the Taliban fell. The chapter concludes with the CIA taking the lead in the war effort, despite the Pentagon's lack of a clear plan, setting the stage for a long and complicated conflict. Weiner's account, based on conversations with key players, reveals a period of intense pressure, flawed assumptions, and a rapid descent into a global war on terror with uncertain goals. Chapter 6: We Were All Making It Up as We Went Along. Tim Weiner details how the CIA, accustomed to overthrowing governments, unexpectedly found itself boosting a leader to power in Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai. For decades, the agency had interfered in other countries, often supporting questionable rulers as long as they opposed communism. But installing Karzai was different. The CIA's support, particularly from a daring officer named Greg Vogel, was crucial to Karzai's survival and rise to the presidency after the Taliban's fall. Karzai, a Pashtun prince with a diplomatic style, had a complicated past, shifting alliances throughout Afghanistan's conflicts. He'd worked with the CIA in the 1980s, then briefly joined the post-Soviet government and even the Taliban before turning against them after his father's murder. He sought American help, offering information and urging intervention. Vogel, a tough Marine-turned-CIA operative, became Karzai's key connection to American power, a friendship that would shape Afghanistan's future. As the U.S. prepared to invade in 2001, the CIA struggled with a plan. Station Chief Robert Grenier favored Karzai, believing he was the best hope for a stable Afghanistan, but faced resistance from Washington. Hank Crumpton, briefing President Bush, pushed for backing the Northern Alliance, a group with a history of fighting the Pashtuns, who were Karzai's people. Grenier and Vogel argued that supporting the Northern Alliance would ignite another civil war. Weiner highlights the chaotic planning within the U.S. government. There was no clear strategy for what would happen after the Taliban fell. Bush was already focused on Iraq and wanted American troops out of Afghanistan quickly. A tragic mistake occurred when an American bomb, called in with incorrect coordinates, struck Karzai's position, killing and wounding dozens. Despite this, Karzai was chosen to lead Afghanistan at a conference in Bonn, Germany. The CIA continued to heavily influence events, providing Karzai with large sums of cash, ghost money, to buy loyalty from warlords and officials. This fueled widespread corruption. Ahmed Wali Karzai, the president's brother, became a powerful and corrupt figure in Kandahar, benefiting from CIA contracts and protecting drug traffickers. Despite warnings from ambassadors about the corruption, the Bush administration largely ignored the problem, prioritizing the hunt for al-Qaeda. Weiner emphasizes that the CIA's focus on covert action overshadowed concerns about good governance. The agency's methods, while effective in the short term, undermined Afghanistan's long-term stability. The author points out that the CIA's actions, combined with the U.S. government's lack of a clear plan, ultimately contributed to the country's eventual collapse. The agency's pursuit of its mission, even at the expense of building a stable nation, proved to be a critical flaw. Chapter 7: Unprecedented Trouble. Tim Weiner details a troubling shift in how the CIA operated after the 9/11 attacks, revealing a move towards harsh methods and questionable intelligence. The chapter begins with the capture of Ibrahim the German, a key figure in the Jerba synagogue bombing, and highlights a traditional, successful capture orchestrated by Margaret Henoch. This sets a contrast with the methods that would soon become commonplace. Weiner shows how George Tenet, then the CIA director, initiated extraordinary rendition, secretly sending suspected terrorists to countries like Egypt, knowing they would be tortured. This was done with the goal of gathering information, regardless of the ethical concerns. The case of Ibn al-Sheikh al-Libi is particularly disturbing. He was sent to Cairo, tortured, and falsely confessed to Iraq having ties to al-Qaeda, information that was then used to justify the invasion of Iraq. Tyler Drumhiller's account illustrates how easily flawed intelligence could reach the president, and how difficult it was to correct course once presented. As the number of captured fighters swelled after the Afghanistan invasion, the CIA found itself unprepared to handle them. Buzzy Krongard openly questioned what to do with the prisoners, acknowledging the agency lacked the necessary skills and resources. This led to a further reliance on rendition, and eventually, the establishment of black sites, secret prisons, in countries like Poland and Thailand. The capture of Abu Zubaydah, falsely presented as al-Qaeda's third-in-command, became a turning point. José Rodriguez, seeking a quick path to intelligence, turned to controversial interrogation techniques, including waterboarding, drawing on past, ethically questionable CIA experiments like MK-Ultra. He sought approval for these methods, ultimately receiving it from President Bush. Despite the harsh treatment, Zubaydah largely repeated information already obtained by the FBI through standard interrogation. Weiner emphasizes the internal debate within the CIA. While Rodriguez pushed for aggressive tactics, figures like John Rizzo, the agency's lawyer, expressed serious concerns about legality and potential repercussions. Rizzo's struggle highlights the moral conflict at the heart of the program. The chapter details how the CIA bypassed its own expertise, relying on psychologists with limited real-world experience to design interrogation methods. The story of Gul Rahman's death at the salt pit in Afghanistan and the subsequent abuses at the black site in Poland demonstrate the dangers of unchecked power and the lack of oversight. Charlie Wise's arrival and attempt to implement brutal techniques were only stopped by internal whistleblowing. Weiner reveals a pattern of disregard for rules and a willingness to push boundaries, even when it led to tragedy. Throughout the chapter, Weiner uses interviews with former CIA officials to paint a picture of an agency grappling with a new kind of war, and making choices that would haunt it for years to come. The author shows how the pressure to prevent another attack led to a descent into methods that compromised the agency's values and ultimately yielded questionable results. The chapter concludes with Tenet preparing to support Colin Powell's presentation to the UN regarding Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, a case built, in part, on information obtained through these very methods. Chapter 8, What You Do When You Do Not Know. Tim Weiner details a troubling lead-up to the Iraq War, revealing how intelligence was twisted to fit a predetermined political goal. The chapter centers on the period immediately following 9/11 and the intense pressure placed on the CIA to build a case for invading Iraq, despite shaky evidence. George Tenet, then Director of Central Intelligence, felt exhausted from constant work and worry after the attacks. He received President Bush's State of the Union speech beforehand, but shockingly didn't even read it, passing it on to a subordinate without review. This set the stage for a flawed vetting process. The responsibility for confirming the speech's claims fell to Alan Foley, who led the CIA's Weapons Intelligence Division. Foley created an environment where analysts felt pressured to find intelligence supporting war, rather than objectively assessing the facts. He prioritized protecting intelligence sources and methods over verifying the accuracy of the accusations against Saddam Hussein. Tenet later realized this was a critical mistake. He had already learned, through a conversation with the British spy chief, Sir Richard Dearlove, that the Bush administration was determined to remove Saddam and would fix the facts to justify the invasion. Bush's State of the Union address contained alarming warnings about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, claims that originated both from the CIA and from advisors like Dick Cheney. The president painted a frightening picture of Saddam potentially arming terrorists with these weapons. However, the intelligence used to support these claims was deeply flawed. Cheney essentially ran a separate, shadow National Security Council, bypassing normal procedures and influencing the information reaching the president. Colin Powell, the Secretary of State, was tasked with presenting the case for war to the United Nations. He was chosen because he was seen as the most credible member of the administration. Powell received a speech crafted by Scooter Libby, at Cheney's direction, designed to be a legal argument for war. This speech relied heavily on information from Doug Feith, a Pentagon official who used unreliable sources, most notably an Iraqi informant known as Curveball, who falsely claimed Iraq had mobile biological weapons labs. Powell's own intelligence experts found the speech full of rumors and unverified information. The National Intelligence Estimate, NIE, the CIA's official assessment, also contained flawed conclusions, stating with high confidence that Saddam possessed weapons of mass destruction despite limited evidence. Analysts were pressured to confirm existing beliefs rather than challenge them. The CIA's focus shifted from gathering accurate intelligence to finding information that supported the administration's desired outcome. Weiner highlights a culture within the CIA where analysts felt compelled to deliver information that pleased policymakers, even if it meant bending the truth. Jami Miss-Sick, the director of intelligence analysis, attempted to strengthen the case for war after Bush expressed dissatisfaction with the initial NIE. Analysts were explicitly told to state that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Powell, despite his own reservations, presented the case to the UN, relying on flawed intelligence. Tenet, overwhelmed and exhausted, failed to challenge the process. The chapter concludes with the war underway, and the CIA deeply implicated in the deception that led to it. Chapter 9, Sufi Mystics and Walking Zombies. Tim Weiner details the CIA's early involvement in Iraq leading up to and immediately following the 2003 invasion, revealing a complex web of alliances, intelligence gathering, and ultimately, miscalculations. The chapter centers on Tom Sylvester, a rising star within the CIA, and his unconventional approach to intelligence gathering, recruiting a Sufi sheikh and his followers to spy on Saddam Hussein's regime. Sylvester's team, a mix of CIA officers, special forces, and commandos, successfully penetrated Saddam's inner circle, gaining access to high-ranking officials and crucial military information. This success was fueled by millions of dollars funneled to Kurdish leaders like Jalal Talabani, a long-term, yet often unreliable, ally of the United States. Weiner highlights the inherent risks and moral compromises within the intelligence world, briefly mentioning a station chief, Andrew Warren, who faced serious accusations while serving abroad. Despite this, Sylvester's team generally thrived, with many members going on to prominent positions within the agency. The author emphasizes the ambitious plan orchestrated by Louis Ruda, aiming to gather intelligence, recruit agents, and support the impending invasion. A key element of this plan involved a deceptive strategy, feigning a large-scale attack in the north to distract Iraqi forces while the main invasion occurred in the south. A risky maneuver called Operation Ugly Baby. The chapter reveals the CIA's reliance on unconventional methods, like utilizing satellite phones pointed towards Mecca for secure communication with Iraqi agents. Sylvester's intelligence proved valuable, even leading to a failed attempt to assassinate Saddam Hussein based on his information. However, the narrative quickly shifts to the chaotic aftermath of the invasion, where the CIA's successes were overshadowed by the disastrous decisions made by the Bush administration. Weiner portrays a growing disconnect between the intelligence gathered by officers like Charlie Seidel, the CIA station chief in Baghdad, and the policies dictated by Washington. Seidel's warnings about the rising insurgency and the potential for civil war were largely ignored. The decision to disband the Iraqi army, pushed by Paul Bremer, the American viceroy, was particularly damaging, creating a large pool of disgruntled and armed former soldiers who quickly became insurgents. The author illustrates the frustration within the CIA as their assessments were dismissed by officials like Donald Rumsfeld and Douglas Feith, who clung to optimistic narratives despite mounting evidence to the contrary. The search for weapons of mass destruction, the initial justification for the war, proved fruitless, further eroding trust in the agency. The chapter concludes with a sense of foreboding, as Tenet, the CIA director, recognized the impending crisis and the likelihood that the agency would bear the blame for the unfolding disaster in Iraq. Weiner suggests that the CIA was set up to take the fall for policy failures, highlighting the difficult position of intelligence officials navigating political pressures and flawed strategies. Chapter 10, A Beautiful Operation. Tim Weiner tells a thrilling story of a secret 9-year mission by the CIA to stop a dangerous nuclear smuggling ring led by AQ. Khan, a Pakistani scientist. The operation unfolded as the world worried about weapons of mass destruction, especially after the events of 9/11. It showcased the skill and patience of CIA officers like Robert Gorlick, Paula Doyle, and Jim Lawler, who worked tirelessly behind the scenes. The story begins with the idea that great spying often happens alongside big mistakes. As the world debated whether Iraq had weapons, this team quietly worked to prevent a much larger threat. Gorlick, a seasoned spy who could blend into any culture, led the Counterproliferation Division. He assembled a special unit to focus solely on Khan, who had gone from helping Pakistan build a bomb to selling nuclear technology to anyone with enough money. Doyle and Lawler were the heart of the operation. They realized that simply trying to stop Khan through normal means wouldn't work. Lawler, nicknamed Mad Dog, came up with a daring plan: to become a nuclear dealer themselves, creating fake companies to attract Khan's attention. They built a network of secret businesses and recruited a diverse team, including a Cuban exile and a cyber expert. They even gave team members code names from King Arthur legends, calling the operation Excalibur. The team's work was incredibly detailed. They tracked Khan's shipments, infiltrated his factories, and even wired his buildings for surveillance. They discovered he was supplying North Korea and Libya with the tools to build bombs. This was especially alarming because Libya's leader, Muammar Gaddafi, was known for supporting terrorism. As the US invaded Iraq, the CIA realized Gaddafi was watching closely. He feared being next. This gave the CIA an opening. Through back-channel negotiations with British intelligence, Gaddafi signaled he was willing to give up his nuclear program in exchange for security guarantees. The key to convincing him came when the CIA intercepted a shipment of nuclear components headed to Libya. This interception, orchestrated by Gorlick and Italian intelligence, provided the proof needed to pressure Gaddafi into admitting his program and dismantling it. Meanwhile, pressure was put on Pakistan to deal with Khan. Though initially reluctant, Pakistan eventually placed Khan under house arrest, effectively ending his nuclear black market. Weiner highlights how this operation succeeded because of clever spying, not military force. The CIA used its skills to gather intelligence, build trust, and ultimately disarm a dangerous enemy. The author notes that this success was a high point for the CIA under Director Tenet, but it was followed by a period of decline. The story illustrates the importance of secret operations and the dedication of the people who carry them out, often without public recognition. Chapter 11, The Butcher's Bill. Tim Weiner details a period of intense fallout within the CIA following the invasion of Iraq, a time marked by broken trust and accountability. The chapter centers on the aftermath of faulty intelligence regarding weapons of mass destruction and the subsequent abuses committed by CIA personnel. George Tenet, the director at the time, remained publicly silent for a long period, defending the agency despite privately grappling with the lack of evidence supporting the claims of Iraqi weaponry. His relationship with President Bush deteriorated, and though he offered to resign, Bush refused, wanting to avoid any appearance of division during an election year. Weiner reveals a disturbing pattern of misconduct, coming to light through investigations led by Inspector General John Helgerson. These investigations uncovered severe mistreatment of prisoners in Afghanistan, Thailand, and Poland, potentially amounting to torture. Simultaneously, the death of Iraqi detainee Manidal al-Jumaidi at Abu Ghraib prison became a symbol of American abuse, though the CIA attempted to shift blame to the Navy SEALs. The author highlights how a culture of secrecy and a desire to avoid responsibility permeated the agency. The story of al-Jumaidi's death illustrates a troubling dynamic. Charlie Seidel, a former Baghdad station chief, had reported abuse at Camp Nama, and headquarters issued directives to avoid direct involvement in prisoner interrogation, deferring to the military and prohibiting harsh techniques. However, his successor, Jerry Mayer, disregarded these rules. Mayer's appointment was questioned by other CIA officials, and his leadership was criticized as ineffective, with reports of him prioritizing personal interests over station operations. A SEAL named Dan Cirillo explained that the CIA used the military to carry out brutal interrogations, keeping their own hands seemingly clean. Weiner describes a system where CIA officers, like Mark Swanner, and military personnel engaged in abusive practices, culminating in al-Jumaidi's death. The prisoner was subjected to horrific treatment, and the CIA attempted to cover up their involvement. A deal between Stephen Stormone, head of the Baghdad station's detainee exploitation cell, and LT Col Stephen Jordan allowed the CIA to disappear prisoners within Abu Ghraib, violating both Army regulations and international law. The author emphasizes the lack of oversight and the willingness to operate outside legal boundaries. The chapter also portrays the chaotic environment within the Baghdad station itself. Many newly recruited officers lacked experience and Arabic language skills, operating in a dangerous environment with limited direction. The station was plagued by issues of alcohol abuse, sexual misconduct, and a general sense of being overwhelmed. Bob Kandra, the new station chief, inherited a deeply troubled organization. Finally, Weiner details Tenet's eventual downfall, triggered by the 9/11 Commission and a damaging leak to Bob Woodward suggesting Tenet had presented the case for war as a slam dunk. Tenet felt betrayed by the White House and announced his retirement. His successor, Porter Goss, was chosen despite concerns from within the agency, and his leadership ultimately led to further turmoil and a political purge within the CIA. The author concludes that the period was marked by a fundamental breakdown in trust and a series of failures that deeply damaged the agency's reputation. Chapter 12, Guerrilla Warfare. Tim Weiner paints a picture of a CIA in deep trouble during the mid-2000s, reeling from criticism over the Iraq War and facing a battle for its very survival. The chapter reveals a CIA fractured by internal conflict and under attack from the White House, politicians, and the media. Weiner relies heavily on first-hand accounts from those who lived through it, like former Deputy Director John McLaughlin, who described the agency as being beaten like little baby seals. These interviews show a sense of desperation within the CIA, as it faced accusations of failure regarding weapons of mass destruction and the escalating chaos in Iraq. The Bush administration, according to Weiner's sources, particularly blamed the CIA for the problems in Iraq, even though the administration itself had bent and twisted intelligence to fit its own agenda. This led to a breakdown in trust, with President Bush publicly dismissing CIA assessments as guessing. Senator John Kerry defended the agency, but the damage was done. The chapter highlights a leak of a national intelligence estimate predicting chaos in Iraq, further infuriating the president and fueling suspicions of disloyalty within the agency. Weiner uses the testimony of Stephen Hadley, who would later become National Security Advisor, to show how these leaks eroded the president's confidence in the intelligence community. Porter Goss, appointed as the new CIA director, arrived with a mandate to root out those perceived as disloyal. Weiner's interviews reveal that Goss brought in a team, nicknamed the Goslings, who aggressively purged experienced officers and analysts. This created a climate of fear and further divided the agency. The author uses the accounts of Jose Rodriguez, a key figure in the controversial interrogation program, to illustrate the attacks from various sides: human rights groups, Congress, and even the CIA's own Inspector General. Weiner details how Goss's right-hand man, Dusty Fago, was a deeply flawed character with a history of questionable behavior. Through interviews and documented incidents, the author shows Fago's connections to shady dealings and his abuse of power. The story of Fago's road rage incident in Vienna and his attempt to use false credentials is a striking example of his character. Weiner uses the recollections of James Olson, a former station chief, to emphasize the shock within the agency at Fago's appointment, suggesting Goss was taken in by a con man. The chapter culminates in the revelation of the destruction of CIA interrogation tapes, a decision made by Rodriguez with the approval of Fago. Weiner uses the detailed account of John Rizzo, the CIA's former general counsel, to show the illegal and secretive nature of this act. The destruction of the tapes and the subsequent investigation further damaged the CIA's reputation and led to a crisis of confidence. Through these interviews, Weiner demonstrates how the combination of political pressure, internal strife, and questionable leadership brought the CIA to the brink of collapse. Chapter 13, The Black Cloud. Tim Weiner presents a gripping account of the CIA's struggles in the years following 9/11, revealing a deeply troubled agency grappling with a shifting war on terror. The chapter centers on Tom Sylvester, a seasoned CIA officer tasked with running a secret black station in Damascus, Syria, a hotbed of terrorist activity. Syria was a dangerous place, full of spies watching spies, and Sylvester's job was to figure out who was working with whom. Specifically, Bashar al-Assad's government and groups like Hezbollah and the Iranian Quds Force. Weiner illustrates the immense challenges faced by the CIA through the attempted attack on the Damascus embassy in 2006, a stark reminder of the constant threat. This event prompted a crucial meeting in Kuwait, bringing together top American intelligence and military leaders. The group, including General McChrystal and Hank Crumpton, realized the war in Iraq wasn't going well. They acknowledged that harsh interrogation techniques and detention policies were damaging America's reputation and hindering intelligence gathering. The focus shifted to understanding the flow of foreign fighters into Iraq, largely through Syria, and the role of Iran in supplying them with deadly weapons like explosively formed projectiles. The Kuwait Conference highlighted a critical evolution in thinking, moving beyond simply identifying the enemy to understanding why they were fighting. This required a closer collaboration between the CIA and the military, a fusion of intelligence gathering and battlefield operations. Weiner emphasizes this point through the recounting of McChrystal's evolving questions about the enemy. The chapter then details the internal turmoil within the CIA itself, marked by the disastrous tenure of Director Porter Goss. Weiner, through interviews, paints Goss as ineffective and damaging to the agency's morale, creating a climate of fear and distrust. The arrival of General Mike Hayden as CIA director signaled a turning point. Hayden, unlike his predecessor, was a career intelligence professional who prioritized restoring order and rebuilding trust. He took bold steps, including acknowledging the CIA's secret prison program and proposing to brief Congress on it, despite significant resistance. Weiner reveals Hayden's willingness to confront uncomfortable truths, like the reality of a civil war in Iraq, and his determination to improve intelligence gathering. Weiner's narrative then exposes a series of controversial CIA operations, including the unauthorized capture of Rashid Rauf, a suspected terrorist, by Jose Rodriguez. This action, undertaken without proper authorization and against the wishes of British intelligence, caused a major rift with a key ally. The chapter also touches upon the agency's involvement in extraordinary rendition, the practice of kidnapping and transferring suspects to foreign countries for interrogation, often involving torture. These actions, Weiner suggests, further eroded the CIA's credibility and damaged its relationships with allies. Ultimately, the chapter culminates in President Bush's decision to implement the surge in Iraq, a strategy heavily influenced by the CIA's intelligence assessments. Weiner portrays Hayden and Gates as instrumental in convincing Bush to change course, acknowledging the failures of the previous strategy and the need for a new approach. The author demonstrates how accurate intelligence, even when it delivers unwelcome news, can be crucial in shaping policy and potentially altering the course of a conflict. Through detailed accounts and insights gleaned from interviews, Weiner reveals a CIA struggling to adapt to the complexities of the 21st century security landscape, grappling with ethical dilemmas, and striving to provide the intelligence needed to protect national security. Chapter 14, How Far Were We Prepared to Go? Tim Weiner details a pivotal year, 2007, in the Iraq War and the broader fight against terrorism, revealing how the CIA operated under immense pressure and shifting strategies. The arrival of General David Petraeus in Baghdad marked a turning point, and Weiner highlights the exceptionally close working relationship Petraeus forged with Paul Nevin, the CIA station chief. This partnership, boosted by Vice President Cheney's intervention to keep Nevin in place, was central to a new, collaborative approach. The surge of troops demanded a surge of intelligence, leading to unprecedented information sharing between the military, diplomats, and spies, a departure from the earlier, often fractured, cooperation. A lucky break, the capture of an al-Qaeda courier with a treasure trove of digital information provided a massive intelligence boost. This data revealed al-Qaeda's plans, safe houses, and targets, fundamentally changing how American forces operated. The CIA and NSA worked tirelessly to decode the information, and it was widely shared, even with allies, as everyone sought to understand and counter the terrorist threat. This period saw a huge increase in intelligence personnel, with over 7,000 officers and analysts involved. Weiner emphasizes the CIA's reliance on partnerships, particularly with Jordan's intelligence service, which received substantial American funding. This collaboration was key to the Anbar Awakening, a rebellion by Sunni sheiks against al-Qaeda in Iraq. The CIA supported this uprising, providing training and resources, and ultimately helped create a national Sunni militia, the Sons of Iraq, which significantly contributed to reducing violence. However, the author notes this success was temporary. The chapter also reveals the internal tensions and frustrations within the Bush administration. While Petraeus focused on security, there was a lack of corresponding political progress in Iraq. Ambassador Crocker and Petraeus were critical of Prime Minister al-Maliki, but Bush remained committed to him, hindering efforts to build a stable government. Simultaneously, the administration considered military action against Syria's suspected nuclear program, ultimately allowing Israel to carry out the strike. Weiner details the growing strain on the CIA. As counterterrorism efforts consumed its resources, the agency's close ties to private military contractors like Blackwater also came under scrutiny after a deadly incident in Baghdad, where Blackwater mercenaries killed 14 Iraqi civilians. The assassination of Benazir Bhutto in Pakistan further complicated matters, exposing the complex and often contradictory relationship between the U.S. and its ally, Pakistan. The chapter concludes with a sense of unease. Despite some successes, the war on terror was faltering. The CIA lacked sufficient intelligence about the tribal areas of Pakistan, a haven for al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Bush hesitated to authorize aggressive action in Pakistan, fearing the consequences of escalating the conflict. By the end of 2007, the CIA had not captured any significant terrorist leaders, and the threat remained very real. Weiner suggests a feeling of missed opportunities and a growing sense that the initial strategies were not sustainable. Chapter 15, The God's Eye View. Tim Weiner presents a gripping account of the CIA's actions following the 9/11 attacks, largely through the voices of those who were at the center of it all. The chapter begins with José Rodriguez, a key figure in the CIA's clandestine service, reflecting on his intense focus on al-Qaeda and his eventual departure. However, his retirement was quickly interrupted by a crisis. A New York Times reporter was investigating his order to destroy videotapes documenting harsh interrogation methods. Rodriguez and Gina Haspel, his former chief of staff, realized this could unravel much more than just his actions. Weiner reveals a cover-up extending to the highest levels of the CIA. Porter Goss, the then director, hadn't informed Congress about the destroyed tapes, breaking the rules. John Rizzo, the CIA's lawyer, understood the gravity of the situation immediately. The Times published the story on December 7th, sparking a prolonged investigation led by John Durham. Though Durham's report found Rodriguez acted without authority, he wasn't prosecuted. Ultimately, Rodriguez received a mild reprimand, which he proudly declared he would frame, showcasing his unwavering belief in his actions. Through interviews, Weiner illustrates a culture within the CIA where pushing boundaries was often seen as a virtue. Hayden, another former director, admitted the agency's operations always existed in a gray area, legally and ethically. This mindset is further highlighted by a discussion of a covert operation, the assassination of Ahmad Mugniyeh, a Hezbollah commander responsible for the deaths of many Americans, including CIA officers. Weiner details how Hayden secured approval from President Bush for the assassination, navigating the legal and moral complexities surrounding such actions. The CIA collaborated with Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, utilizing a network of agents and a car bomb to carry out the hit. While the operation remained secret for years, it exemplified the CIA's willingness to operate on the fringes of the law. This success emboldened Hayden to push for even greater freedom in using drone strikes against suspected terrorists. The chapter then shifts to the political landscape as the 2008 presidential election neared. Both John McCain and Barack Obama criticized the CIA's use of torture, raising fears among CIA lawyers of potential prosecution. Hayden sought preemptive pardons from Bush, but the request was denied. Ultimately, Bush authorized expanded drone strike authority, driven by the escalating violence in Afghanistan and a desire to prevent future attacks on American soil. Weiner uses interviews to show how the increased drone strikes, while initially successful in eliminating key al-Qaeda figures, also resulted in civilian casualties and fueled resentment. The author highlights the moral questions raised by these actions, as expressed by General McChrystal. The chapter concludes with a reflection on Bush's legacy, emphasizing how his policies and the CIA's actions damaged America's reputation and failed to achieve the stated goal of spreading freedom. Through the voices of those involved, Weiner paints a complex picture of the CIA's role in the war on terror, revealing a willingness to operate in the shadows, push legal boundaries, and grapple with the ethical consequences of its actions. Chapter 16, No Middle Ground. Tim Weiner details the surprising continuity between the Bush and Obama administrations regarding the CIA's aggressive counterterrorism policies, despite Obama's campaign promises of change. Interviews with figures like John Rizzo revealed that Obama's team quickly sought reassurance they wouldn't dismantle the CIA, intending to maintain a vigorous approach to fighting terrorism. This initial signal suggested a continuation of existing practices, a point emphasized by Rizzo's caution about truly understanding the agency's direction until a new director was appointed. The initial choice of John Brennan as CIA director highlighted the challenges of balancing change with experience. Brennan, a longtime CIA veteran, advised Obama during the transition and even expressed concerns about past CIA practices like black sites and drone strikes causing civilian deaths. However, his association with controversial programs led to significant opposition, ultimately forcing him to withdraw his nomination. This episode demonstrated the political difficulties of anyone linked to the CIA's past actions taking a leadership role. Mike Hayden, the outgoing director, recalled a tense exchange with Brennan, revealing the frustration and defensiveness within the agency. Weiner illustrates Obama's gradual immersion into the world of intelligence, beginning with his first president's daily brief after the election. While Obama quickly grasped the core issues, he wasn't immediately privy to the CIA's covert operations. A briefing with Hayden revealed the scope of these operations, including targeted killings, disrupting nuclear programs, and funding foreign intelligence services, and Obama's difficulty in accepting the extent of these actions. The vice president-elect, Joe Biden, was more vocal during this briefing, highlighting the challenge of bringing both leaders up to speed. The search for a new CIA director led to Leon Panetta, a surprising choice given his lack of direct intelligence experience. However, his political background and past criticism of CIA abuses made him appealing. Panetta's mandate from Obama was clear: restore the CIA's credibility. He consulted former directors and relied heavily on Brennan's guidance during the transition, retaining key personnel and prioritizing the war on terror. Despite his initial unfamiliarity with the agency's operations, Panetta quickly became involved in the drone program, approving hundreds of strikes. Weiner emphasizes the remarkable continuity in counterterrorism practices under Obama, with the number of drone strikes actually increasing compared to the Bush administration. Hayden expressed surprise and even approval of this continuation, lamenting the end of detention and interrogation programs. Obama's rationale, as presented by Weiner, was a pragmatic one, eliminating threats before they could harm the U.S., while also avoiding the legal and ethical issues associated with detention. The hunt for Osama bin Laden further illustrates this continuity. Despite years of intelligence gathering, bin Laden's location remained unknown. A potential breakthrough came through a CIA asset in Pakistan, a doctor who infiltrated al-Qaeda. However, a critical failure in vetting this asset led to a devastating suicide bombing at a CIA base in Khost, Afghanistan, killing 7 agency personnel. Weiner details how a lack of counterintelligence scrutiny, driven by the urgency to find bin Laden, contributed to this tragedy. Charles Allen's analysis revealed systemic failures in the operation, with the intense focus on the mission overshadowing necessary caution. The author highlights the importance of counterintelligence, a function that had been sidelined in the agency's prioritization of counterterrorism. Ultimately, Weiner portrays a CIA navigating a complex transition, grappling with its past, and continuing its aggressive counterterrorism efforts under a new president. Chapter 17, The Keys to the Castle. Tim Weiner details a post-9/11 intelligence world overwhelmed by information and a loss of control, a situation revealed through conversations with past CIA leaders. The initial idea after 9/11 was simple: share everything. Before the attacks, information was kept secret on a need-to-know basis, a system that failed when the CIA didn't tell the FBI about 2 future hijackers already in the US. But opening up the flow of secrets created a new problem. Instead of one secure entrance, there were now thousands, and no one knew who had access to what. It was like giving everyone keys to a giant library of secrets. Weiner recounts how Chelsea Manning's leak to WikiLeaks exposed this vulnerability. Manning, a troubled intelligence analyst, downloaded massive amounts of classified data and gave it to Julian Assange, who then published it online. This included sensitive information that put people's lives at risk, like the names of informants in Afghanistan and Iraq. The Justice Department argued that Assange's actions created a serious and immediate danger to those individuals. The sheer scale of the leak demonstrated how easily secrets could be stolen and spread. The chapter then shifts to the hunt for Osama bin Laden and the challenges faced by the CIA. John Bennett, a new chief of the clandestine service, had to balance the need for better information sharing with the ongoing threat of terrorism and the pursuit of key figures like Anwar al-Awlaki, a radical imam inspiring attacks. Al-Awlaki, who had once lived in the US, was using the internet to encourage violence. Weiner illustrates the complex legal and ethical questions surrounding the targeted killing of American citizens abroad. The CIA, with the approval of President Obama, decided to kill al-Awlaki, arguing he posed an imminent threat. This decision was based on a controversial legal opinion that allowed the president to order the death of a citizen without a trial. The author explains how the CIA's success in recruiting informants within al-Qaeda's ranks proved crucial in tracking bin Laden. This was a significant achievement for John Bennett and his team in Pakistan. The trail eventually led to a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, but the intelligence was largely circumstantial. Despite doubts from some officials, including the Secretary of Defense, Obama approved the raid. Weiner details the tension between the CIA and the U.S. ambassador to Pakistan, Cameron Munter, over drone strikes. Munter insisted on approving each strike, which angered the CIA, who felt he was hindering their operations. This conflict, combined with an incident involving a CIA contractor who shot and killed Pakistanis, severely damaged relations with Pakistan's intelligence service, the ISI. The raid on the Abbottabad compound was ultimately successful, resulting in bin Laden's death. However, Weiner emphasizes that the operation was fraught with risk and uncertainty. The author highlights the secrecy surrounding the mission and the difficult decisions made by Obama and his advisors. The chapter concludes with a reminder that even after bin Laden's death, the war on terror continued, as evidenced by a rocket attack on a CIA outpost in Afghanistan. Through these accounts, Weiner shows how the CIA navigated a dangerous and ever-changing landscape in the 21st century, often facing internal conflicts and difficult choices. Chapter 18, The Right Side of History. Tim Weiner details how, after the raid on Osama bin Laden's compound, intelligence revealed the CIA had misjudged bin Laden's influence. They thought he was losing control, but he was actually still actively planning attacks and guiding al-Qaeda. This discovery came as a surprise and showed a gap in the CIA's understanding of the situation. Weiner explains that the Arab Spring uprisings, beginning in Tunisia, presented a challenge the CIA didn't foresee. The agency relied on information from long-standing relationships with leaders in the Middle East, who were often older and out of touch with what was happening on the ground. These leaders didn't accurately report the growing discontent and the power of social media in organizing protests. Former Director Panetta admitted the CIA missed the boat and underestimated the impact of platforms like Facebook and Twitter in uniting protesters. The author highlights a disagreement within the Obama administration regarding Egypt's Hosni Mubarak. While some advisors, like John Brennan, wanted to support the protesters, others, like Bob Gates, feared a repeat of the Iranian Revolution and worried about empowering Islamic extremists. Gates cautioned against pushing Mubarak out, warning other leaders might shoot first and talk later. Obama ultimately sided with the protesters, but the aftermath, a military takeover followed by an Islamist victory and then another coup, demonstrated the difficulty of predicting outcomes. Weiner describes how the situation in Libya after Muammar Gaddafi's fall worried intelligence officials. Bin Laden had predicted al-Qaeda could establish a foothold there, turning it into a haven for jihadists. This fear materialized as Libya descended into chaos, with weapons falling into the hands of radical groups. The CIA aided rebels and secured chemical weapons, but the overall outcome was destabilizing. The author details the CIA's miscalculations in Syria. Initial assessments suggested Bashar al-Assad's regime wouldn't resort to widespread violence, a prediction proven tragically wrong. The uprising escalated into a brutal civil war, creating a breeding ground for extremist groups. The CIA initially believed the Arab Spring would weaken al-Qaeda, but it ultimately provided opportunities for the group to regroup and expand. Weiner recounts the transition of power at the CIA, with Panetta moving to the Pentagon and the appointment of David Petraeus as the new director. Petraeus, a highly decorated general, was seen as a potential future presidential candidate. Some believed his CIA appointment was a way to sideline him politically. The chapter concludes with a look at the aftermath of the Iraq War and the American withdrawal in 2011. The author explains that the withdrawal created a power vacuum that allowed al-Qaeda to reemerge as ISIS. Former CIA officer Mark Polymeropoulos describes a period of years of vengeance, focusing on aggressive operations to avenge fallen comrades and disrupt terrorist networks. He details a willingness to take direct action, even against Pakistani military positions, highlighting the intense and often morally ambiguous nature of the fight against terrorism. Weiner shows how, despite years of effort, the situation remained complex and dangerous. Chapter 19, Someone is Always Watching. Tim Weiner presents a story of clashing cultures and fading American power within the CIA during the early 21st century. The chapter centers on David Petraeus's brief and troubled time as director, revealing how his military mindset didn't mesh with the agency's established ways. Through accounts from figures like Morrill, Weiner shows Petraeus initially believed he could easily improve the CIA, seeing its warfighters as key to success. However, he quickly discovered the CIA wasn't like the Army, lacking the direct control he was used to. He wanted big changes and a large staff to enact them, but found the CIA lacked the funds and time for large-scale planning. Weiner illustrates Petraeus's disconnect with many within the agency, noting he unintentionally created a sense that disagreement wasn't welcome. This, combined with his expectations from his military background, caused tension as he pushed for a strategic campaign plan. The author details how Petraeus's vision clashed with the CIA's more flexible structure, designed for quick responses to crises rather than long-term planning. The agency, Weiner explains, had become heavily focused on counterterrorism after 9/11, letting traditional spying skills decline. Through the recollections of figures like Morrill, Weiner highlights a broader shift in global power. The post-Cold War idea of American dominance was fading, with Russia and China rising as challengers. This context is crucial, as Weiner then turns to the failures in intelligence regarding Vladimir Putin. Former President George W. Bush initially trusted Putin, downplaying the need for extensive CIA spying on Russia. However, Bush later realized his mistake, acknowledging Putin was no longer a Democrat. Bill Burns, later to become a key figure, provided insightful assessments of Putin's intentions during his time as ambassador to Moscow, warning of a growing hostility. Weiner then shifts focus to China, detailing the escalating intelligence battle with the Ministry of State Security, MSS. He describes the MSS as a massive organization actively spying on the United States, stealing technology, and attempting to influence American institutions. Despite this constant surveillance, the CIA achieved a significant, though ultimately disastrous, success in recruiting Chinese agents. The author, through accounts and investigations, reveals how a compromised communication system and a former CIA officer, Jerry Chun Xiang Li, led to the exposure and execution of these agents. The chapter culminates with the downfall of Petraeus himself, a scandal involving an affair and the mishandling of classified information. Weiner details the FBI investigation and Petraeus's eventual resignation, emphasizing the importance of trust and integrity within the intelligence community. The author notes that Petraeus's actions undermined the CIA's authority. Ultimately, Weiner portrays a CIA struggling to adapt to a changing world, facing new threats, and grappling with internal challenges, all while navigating the complexities of global power dynamics. The appointment of John Brennan as the new director signaled a potential shift in focus, with an emphasis on addressing past mistakes and reevaluating the agency's role. Chapter 20, Lethal and Legal. Tim Weiner details a troubling period in CIA history, focusing on the aftermath of 9/11 and the difficult choices made in the War on Terror. The chapter centers on how key figures within the agency grappled with the use of harsh interrogation techniques and the subsequent fallout when these practices came under scrutiny. Weiner reveals that Brennan, while a high-ranking official at the time, initially felt deeply disturbed by reports of torture, waterboarding, shackling, and extreme isolation, but lacked the courage to directly confront his superiors, like George Tenet, about his concerns. This internal conflict haunted Brennan, who later considered his silence a major regret. The narrative shifts to the Senate Intelligence Committee's investigation, led by Senator Dianne Feinstein, and the creation of the Torture Report. This comprehensive document, built from over 6 million pages of CIA records, aimed to uncover the truth about the detention and interrogation program. Weiner highlights the tension between the Obama administration's desire to move past the controversies of the Bush years and the committee's determination to expose what had happened. The report's existence itself was surprising to Brennan, who hadn't anticipated such a thorough investigation. A key event that fueled the report was the destruction of videotapes documenting the torture of Abu Zubaydah, ordered by Jose Rodriguez, and the subsequent cover-up involving former director Porter Goss, who failed to inform Congress. Weiner emphasizes the CIA's initial attempts to control the narrative, exemplified by Phil Mudd's argument that the agency needed to sell its version of events to the public to avoid negative consequences. This included spinning stories to journalists and collaborating with Hollywood on the film Zero Dark 30, which portrayed torture as a crucial element in finding Osama bin Laden. However, even within the agency, there was disagreement about the film's message, with acting director Mike Morrell acknowledging that it created a false impression. The chapter then delves into the internal struggle within the CIA as it responded to the torture report. While admitting some failures in managing the black sites and analyzing interrogation effectiveness, the agency fiercely defended the program's overall value, arguing that it had yielded vital intelligence. Weiner introduces Gina Haspel, a controversial figure linked to the waterboarding of Zubaydah and the political maneuvering surrounding her career. The situation escalated when CIA IT specialists illegally accessed Senate staff computers in an attempt to discover the source of a leak. The Panetta Review, a damning internal assessment that undermined the agency's defense. Weiner details the resulting crisis, including false statements made by Brennan about the hacking incident and the intervention of Vice President Biden to de-escalate the conflict. Ultimately, Obama acknowledged that the U.S. had crossed a line with its use of torture, but also expressed understanding for the difficult circumstances faced by intelligence officials after 9/11. The chapter concludes with a reflection on the moral complexities of the war on terror and the challenge of balancing security with American values. Weiner points out that the CIA's actions were driven by a belief that they were preventing another catastrophic attack, but that this justification did not erase the ethical compromises made. The debate over whether the intelligence gained through torture could have been obtained through other means remained unresolved, leaving a lasting stain on the agency's reputation. Chapter 21, Face-Eating Baboons. Tim Weiner details a significant shift in the CIA's focus following the fall of the Berlin Wall, as old Cold War rivalries with Russia and China resurfaced. The agency, accustomed to fighting terrorists, found itself needing to re-engage in classic great power competition. Interviews with former officials revealed a key difference in the approaches of these two nations. China aimed to gather massive amounts of data on Americans for potential future conflict, while Russia seemed intent on simply causing chaos and undermining the United States. The story centers on a new CIA station chief in the Netherlands and his partnership with Rob Bertholli, head of Dutch intelligence. Bertholli's team, despite being small, had exceptional skills in cyber warfare and quickly discovered a Russian cyber attack targeting governments and organizations across Europe. This was spurred by the shooting down of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17, an event Putin denied responsibility for, leaving the U.S. with limited intelligence to counter his claims. Weiner highlights how this lack of insight led to a misjudgment by the Obama administration, underestimating Russia's power and intentions. The Dutch intelligence service achieved a remarkable breakthrough, identifying the malware used in the attacks and even penetrating the network of a building near Red Square, where the Russian hackers operated. They used facial recognition, supplied by the CIA, to confirm the hackers were intelligence officers. This information, shared with the CIA station chief, came with a warning. Any compromise of the source would result in the chief's expulsion. This created a difficult situation, as sharing the intelligence without revealing the source was a major challenge. The information was relayed through the CIA to the FBI, Homeland Security, and the NSA. It revealed a widespread Russian cyber attack, using emails disguised as coming from American think tanks and universities. These emails contained malware that allowed hackers access to government systems, including those at the Pentagon, White House, and State Department. The NSA described the ensuing digital battle as hand-to-hand combat, noting the Russians actively fought back and moved their operations constantly, unlike typical cyberattacks. Meanwhile, a separate and equally damaging breach occurred at the Office of Personnel Management. Chinese intelligence stole the records of 22 million federal employees, including sensitive information on CIA officers. This data was quickly analyzed by Alibaba, a major Chinese tech company, and used to identify and potentially compromise American spies. Weiner emphasizes the long-lasting impact of this breach, stating it would affect the CIA for decades. The Chinese also stole data from Marriott hotels and Anthem Health Insurance, further expanding their intelligence-gathering capabilities. Former officials, as quoted by Weiner, lamented the loss of traditional espionage methods in this new digital age. The ease with which personal information could be obtained made it incredibly difficult to maintain cover. The CIA responded by creating a new directorate for digital innovation, significantly increasing its cyber warfare budget. However, internal resistance to these changes was fierce. John Brennan's reorganization of the CIA, aimed at breaking down silos between different departments, faced opposition from many veteran officers. Brennan removed those who resisted, including the chief of the clandestine service, a move considered unprecedented. Despite the changes, the core issue remained. The CIA needed to adapt to a world where information was readily available and adversaries were constantly evolving their tactics. Weiner concludes by highlighting Putin's long-term strategy of undermining the United States and the failure of previous administrations to fully grasp his intentions. The chapter underscores the growing threat of both Russia and China in the realm of intelligence warfare, and the challenges facing the CIA in the 21st century. The author notes Putin's support for Donald Trump during the 2016 election, viewing him as a useful ally in weakening the American-led world order. Chapter 22, The Useful Idiot. Tim Weiner presents a gripping account of the Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential election, framed by the perspectives of former CIA leaders and intelligence officers. The chapter begins with John Brennan's attempt in 2016 to persuade Russia to de-escalate the Syrian civil war, a mission that underscored the growing tension between the two nations. Even earlier, the Obama administration had debated whether to secretly help Syrian rebels fighting against President Assad, a decision ultimately made after Assad used chemical weapons on his own people. This led to a large, covert CIA operation called Timber Sycamore, supported by Saudi Arabia, but it failed to overthrow Assad. Weiner details how, as the election neared, Russian intelligence efforts intensified, particularly after Donald Trump secured the Republican nomination. Victoria Nuland, a top State Department official, immediately recognized the danger posed by Paul Manafort's hiring as Trump's campaign manager, knowing his long-standing ties to pro-Russian interests in Ukraine. The CIA had been tracking Manafort and his associate Konstantin Kilimnik, a suspected Russian intelligence operative, for years, aware of Manafort's financial dealings and potential vulnerability to Russian influence. Manafort allegedly shared Trump campaign polling data with Kilimnik, who passed it on to Russian intelligence, guiding their disinformation efforts. The chapter reveals a disturbing pattern of contact between the Trump campaign and Russian individuals. 38 meetings and 272 communications occurred, involving numerous campaign officials, including Michael Flynn and Jeff Sessions. Weiner emphasizes that nearly everyone involved either lied or misled investigators about these connections. A key figure emerged in George Papadopoulos, a low-level campaign advisor who boasted of being able to arrange a meeting between Trump and Putin, and learned from a Russian contact that the Kremlin possessed damaging information on Hillary Clinton. This information was then shared with Alexander Downer, an Australian diplomat, triggering a chain of events that eventually led to the FBI investigation. As the election progressed, Russian interference escalated. The GRU, Russian military intelligence, began leaking stolen emails from the Democratic National Committee through intermediaries like WikiLeaks and Guccifer. Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, had a history of collaboration with Russian media and actively solicited more damaging information about Clinton. Weiner highlights the crucial role of Roger Stone, a longtime Trump associate, who maintained a back channel to Assange and received advance knowledge of upcoming WikiLeaks releases. Former CIA directors weighed in on the situation, expressing alarm at Trump's behavior and the Russian influence. Mike Morrell publicly stated that Trump appeared to be an unwitting agent of the Russian Federation, while others described him as a useful idiot. The chapter culminates with Trump's inauguration and his immediate clash with the intelligence community. He dismissed the findings of Russian interference as a hoax and even compared the intelligence agencies to Nazi Germany, deeply offending former CIA Director John Brennan. Despite warnings from intelligence officials, Trump visited the CIA headquarters shortly after taking office, seemingly to mend fences, but the damage was already done. Weiner portrays a deeply fractured relationship between the new administration and the intelligence community, setting the stage for further conflict. Chapter 23, Ring Kissing and Kneecapping. Tim Weiner details a tumultuous period at the CIA under the Trump administration, revealing a clash between the agency's traditions and the president's unconventional style. The chapter begins with Trump's visit to CIA headquarters, a speech filled with self-promotion, and a dismissal of tensions with the intelligence community, despite evidence to the contrary. This set the tone for a relationship where loyalty often trumped truth. Weiner shows how Mike Pompeo, appointed as CIA director, quickly became a staunch ally of Trump, prioritizing the president's approval above all else. Pompeo broke with CIA tradition by actively shaping foreign policy, a role the agency typically avoids. He systematically dismantled the work of his predecessors, aligning the CIA with Trump's agenda, even if it meant ignoring expert analysis. Pompeo's success stemmed from unwavering loyalty, a willingness to flatter Trump, and a disregard for dissenting opinions. The author illustrates Pompeo's influence through personnel decisions, bringing in figures like Gina Haspel, who had overseen controversial interrogation programs, and Mike D'Andrea, known for aggressive covert operations. These appointments signaled a shift towards a more hardline approach, prioritizing action over careful consideration. Weiner highlights the dangers of this approach, noting that Pompeo shielded Trump from uncomfortable truths and failed to defend the CIA when attacked by the president. Weiner details Trump and Pompeo's obsession with dismantling the Iran nuclear deal, despite warnings from intelligence officials that it was working. Pompeo dismissed the CIA's assessments, advising Trump to abandon the agreement, a decision that increased the risk of conflict. The author also recounts instances where Trump openly contemplated reckless actions, like going to war with Mexico, and Pompeo's willingness to entertain these ideas rather than offer sound counsel. The chapter reveals a disturbing pattern of disregard for intelligence and a willingness to prioritize political goals over national security. Weiner points to the disastrous handling of Afghanistan, where Pompeo negotiated a deal with the Taliban that ultimately led to the collapse of the Afghan government. The author emphasizes that the CIA's warnings about the Taliban's resurgence were ignored, and the agreement was essentially a surrender. Through careful reporting, Weiner demonstrates how Pompeo's actions undermined the CIA's integrity and effectiveness. The agency's traditional role as an objective source of intelligence was compromised by Pompeo's loyalty to Trump and his willingness to manipulate information to fit the president's narrative. The author's account paints a picture of an intelligence community struggling to navigate a political landscape where truth was often secondary to personal ambition and political expediency. Chapter 24, The Enemy of Intelligence. Tim Weiner's chapter dives into the complicated world of the CIA under the leadership of Gina Haspel, and the challenges she faced navigating a presidency that often seemed to work against American intelligence goals. Haspel, the first woman to lead the agency and a veteran of clandestine operations, especially those targeting Russia, initially appeared well-suited for the role. She'd successfully pushed back against Putin after the poisoning of a former Russian spy in England, and had a deep understanding of the agency's inner workings. However, her confirmation hearings were nearly derailed by questions about her past involvement in harsh interrogation techniques, specifically waterboarding. While she eventually secured the position, she did so with a reluctant Senate and a carefully worded statement distancing herself from those past practices. Weiner details how Haspel found herself in an unprecedented situation, dealing with a president who seemed to admire America's adversaries. Trump repeatedly questioned the intelligence community's findings, particularly regarding Russia's interference in U.S. elections, and often appeared to believe the word of Vladimir Putin over his own intelligence agencies. This created a tense dynamic where Haspel had to carefully balance providing accurate intelligence with avoiding further antagonizing a president who was openly skeptical of the CIA's work. The author illustrates this with Trump's insistence that Ukraine, not Russia, was responsible for the 2016 election hacking, a claim fueled by Russian disinformation. The chapter highlights a critical moment when Haspel demonstrated a willingness to challenge Trump, despite the risks. Following the brutal murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi by Saudi Arabian agents, the CIA concluded that the Saudi crown prince was responsible. Despite Trump's reluctance to acknowledge this, Haspel authorized the release of the CIA's findings to the Washington Post, a move that angered the president. This incident showed Haspel's commitment to truth, even when it clashed with the president's political interests. Weiner emphasizes the growing distrust between Trump and the intelligence community, culminating in accusations that the CIA was part of a deep state conspiracy against him. Trump's appointment of loyalists to key intelligence positions, like John Ratcliffe, further eroded confidence in the agency's independence. The author points out that Ratcliffe's initial nomination was rejected by Republicans who deemed him unqualified, demonstrating the concern within the Senate about the politicization of intelligence. The chapter culminates with the impeachment inquiry, sparked by Trump's attempt to pressure Ukraine into investigating Joe Biden. The whistleblower's complaint, based on information from multiple sources within the government, revealed a clear pattern of abuse of power. Weiner notes the personal risks taken by those who came forward, facing threats and harassment for their courage. The impeachment proceedings, though ultimately unsuccessful in removing Trump from office, exposed the deep rift between the president and the intelligence community, and the lengths to which Trump was willing to go to protect his own interests. Weiner's account paints a picture of a CIA director navigating a treacherous political landscape, attempting to uphold the integrity of the agency while serving a president who often seemed to view it with suspicion and hostility. Chapter 25, we are on the way to a right-wing coup. Tim Weiner details a dramatic overhaul of the CIA's Russia operations following perceived failures to anticipate and counter Russian interference in American elections. Tom Rakusin, the new head of the clandestine service, felt a deep personal animosity toward Russia stemming from his childhood experience during the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. He believed Russia's actions were akin to another 9/11 and was determined to penetrate the Kremlin's inner circle, a goal the CIA had never achieved. Weiner explains that Rakusin brought in experts from counterterrorism, believing their skills in targeting and recruiting could be applied to Russian spies and oligarchs. This was a shift in thinking, as some veteran Russia analysts believed Russians were too difficult to recruit. Rakusin, along with deputies Mark Polymeropoulos and Patrick Wenninger, pushed for a more aggressive approach, sharing previously guarded intelligence with allies and doubling the size of Russia House. They secured significant funding and support from key figures in government and the intelligence committees. The author highlights the challenges faced by these officials. Polymeropoulos recounted Russia's multifaceted attacks, election interference, targeting dissidents, and a generally hostile stance toward the U.S. Wenninger's experience in Afghanistan and Europe informed his understanding of the threat. But he was warned about the resistance to change within Russia House. The transformation involved sharing decades of closely held secrets, a move that initially met with reluctance from the old guard. Weiner notes a disturbing incident involving Polymeropoulos, who experienced symptoms consistent with Havana syndrome during a trip to Moscow, raising questions about potential Russian attacks using directed energy weapons. This incident led to Polymeropoulos' retirement and underscored the risks faced by those working against Russia. Despite this setback, the CIA, by 2019, was in a strong position to counter Russian influence, building strong relationships with intelligence services in allied countries. However, Weiner emphasizes that the CIA's efforts were severely hampered by President Trump's actions and his unusual relationship with Vladimir Putin. Trump's distrust of the intelligence community and his willingness to accept Russian disinformation created a hostile environment. He purged officials he deemed disloyal and attempted to install loyalists within the intelligence agencies, including a failed attempt to place Kash Patel as Haspel's deputy. The author details how Trump's appointees, like Ratcliffe and Grenell, actively worked to undermine the CIA's findings on Russian interference, suppressing reports and spreading conspiracy theories. This culminated in bizarre accusations about a secret CIA computer system, Hammer, and a supposed attempt to arrest Haspel in Germany. Weiner portrays a chaotic White House where outlandish claims and unsubstantiated allegations were taken seriously, threatening the integrity of the intelligence community. Weiner concludes by describing a desperate attempt by Flynn and Powell to convince Trump to seize voting machines and declare martial law, highlighting the extent to which Trump was willing to entertain extreme measures to overturn the election. The chapter ends with Trump's call for a protest on January 6th, foreshadowing the attack on the Capitol and the culmination of the crisis. Through interviews and detailed accounts, Weiner paints a picture of a CIA fighting a determined adversary while simultaneously battling internal threats from within its own government. Chapter 26, The Glory Gate. Tim Weiner paints a picture of a CIA grappling with a changed world and its own complicated past. The chapter begins by showing how, for decades, American leaders believed in spreading democracy, and the CIA saw itself as a key player in that mission. However, Weiner details how this often meant interfering in other countries, sometimes by supporting leaders who weren't democratic at all. These actions, from the Truman to the Reagan years, were justified by the fight against communism, but they created a troubling legacy. The end of the Cold War seemed to offer a new hope, with more democracies than ever before. But this progress didn't last. Weiner argues that the invasion of Iraq under President Bush marked a turning point, damaging America's reputation and contributing to a global decline in democracy. President Trump's actions further eroded faith in American democracy, as he questioned elections and embraced dictators. By the time of the January 6th insurrection, the world saw a weakened America, and democracy was losing ground. The chapter then focuses on the arrival of Gina Haspel and later Bill Burns at the CIA. Haspel is credited with protecting the agency from President Trump's interference, while Burns, a seasoned diplomat, was chosen by President Biden to lead the CIA during a critical time. Weiner emphasizes Burns's long history of working with the CIA, building trust and understanding between the State Department and the intelligence community. Burns believed the U.S. had relied too much on military force and needed to prioritize diplomacy and intelligence. Weiner highlights Burns's regret over the Iraq War, calling it a mistake born of overconfidence. He also recounts Burns's experiences as ambassador to Russia, where he recognized Vladimir Putin's ambition to restore Russia's power. These experiences shaped Burns's view that the U.S. needed a more nuanced approach to foreign policy. The disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan looms large in the chapter. Weiner details how the Doha Agreement, negotiated by the Trump administration, weakened the Afghan government and paved the way for the Taliban's swift takeover. The CIA warned of the impending collapse, but their concerns were initially dismissed. The chaotic evacuation from Kabul, reminiscent of the fall of Saigon, exposed the failures of American policy and intelligence. Weiner recounts the tragic bombing at Abbey Gate, where 13 American service members and many Afghan civilians were killed. He also reveals the mistaken drone strike that killed an innocent aid worker and his family. These events underscored the limitations of American power and the devastating consequences of flawed intelligence. Finally, Weiner describes the CIA's successful operation to kill Ayman al-Zawahiri, the leader of al-Qaeda. This strike, authorized by President Biden, was presented as a victory, but Weiner frames it as a closing chapter in a long and troubled history. Through interviews and detailed reporting, Weiner suggests that the CIA and America itself must learn from its past mistakes to navigate the challenges of the 21st century. The author's narrative suggests a need for a more cautious and diplomatic approach to foreign policy, one that recognizes the limits of American power and the importance of understanding the complexities of the world. Chapter 27, Human Intelligence. Tim Weiner details how the CIA anticipated Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a story built on years of rebuilding its intelligence network focused on Russia. It began after the fall of Kabul, Afghanistan, when Tom Sylvester, the new chief for Europe and Eurasia, noticed many small pieces of information adding up to a clear warning. The CIA, under Sylvester, was building on the work of his predecessor, Tom Rakusin, who had greatly increased the number of sources inside Russia. Former CIA Director Bill Burns explained that Rakusin had not only grown the Russia House, the part of the CIA focused on Russia, but also pushed back against Russian intelligence operations, working with allies to disrupt them. Burns also highlighted a key opportunity. Many people within Russia's government and society were becoming unhappy with Putin. The CIA, led by Dave Marlowe, actively sought out Russians who felt this way, hoping to recruit them as spies. Paula Doyle, a technology expert, played a crucial role by fixing communication systems that had previously put agents at risk, allowing the CIA to safely work with these new sources and share information with other countries. Sylvester emphasized that sharing accurate intelligence with allies was a powerful way to build trust and cooperation, leading to a two-way flow of information. The CIA didn't work alone. Every part of the American intelligence community, including the FBI and the National Security Agency, contributed. General Paul Nakasone used the NSA's ability to listen in on communications, while Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin used spy satellites to track Russian military movements. Avril Haines, who led the overall intelligence community, coordinated these efforts. This marked a shift for the CIA, moving away from its focus on counterterrorism after 20 years and returning to traditional espionage against major powers like Russia and China, as Mike Morrill noted. By October 2021, General Nakasone was convinced an invasion was coming, and Burns and Haines presented this intelligence to President Biden. The CIA's assessment was that Russia planned the largest ground war in Europe since World War II, though they underestimated the Ukrainians' will to fight. Burns explained Putin's motivations stemmed from a long-held belief that Ukraine wasn't a real country and should be part of Russia. Biden sent Burns to Moscow to try and persuade Putin to change his mind, but Putin was firm in his conviction. Before the invasion, the CIA shared detailed plans of the attack with Ukraine, even warning President Zelensky that Putin planned to kill him. This intelligence, combined with years of CIA training and support for Ukrainian intelligence services, proved invaluable. Valentin Nalyvaichenko, a former head of the Ukrainian Security Service, explained how the CIA helped rebuild Ukraine's spy agency after it was riddled with Russian agents. The CIA provided training, equipment, and even paramilitary training, creating a strong partnership. This partnership allowed Ukraine to effectively spy on Russia and even conduct sabotage operations inside Russia. The CIA also launched a major information campaign, revealing Russia's plans to the world, hoping to deter the invasion and build international support for Ukraine. This was a risky move, given past intelligence failures, but Burns and Haines believed it was necessary. Ultimately, the CIA's efforts, combined with the bravery of the Ukrainian people, helped Ukraine resist the Russian invasion, demonstrating a return to the core mission of espionage and a renewed focus on countering major power threats. Weiner concludes that the CIA's success in Ukraine was a result of long-term investment, strong partnerships, and a willingness to share intelligence, marking a significant shift in American intelligence strategy. Chapter 28, The Morality of Espionage. Tim Weiner presents a detailed account of high-stakes intelligence operations and negotiations during a period of escalating global tension. The chapter centers on William Burns, the CIA director, and his efforts to navigate a dangerous landscape marked by Russia's threats of nuclear war and the need to secure the release of Americans held captive abroad. Burns's secret meeting with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Naryshkin, in Turkey in November 2022, underscored the urgency of the situation, as it was the first high-level contact between the two nations since Russia invaded Ukraine. The primary goal was to prevent a nuclear conflict, given Putin's increasingly aggressive rhetoric and actions. Weiner details how intelligence gathered by the CIA and NSA indicated Putin wasn't bluffing about using nuclear weapons, with some assessments estimating a 50-50 chance of a strike. Burns communicated this threat to China, leading to a public warning from Xi Jinping to Putin. Despite these efforts, Putin continued to escalate, moving tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus. Amidst this crisis, Burns successfully negotiated the release of basketball star Brittany Griner in exchange for convicted arms dealer Victor Bout, marking the beginning of a complex series of prisoner exchanges. The author highlights Burns's persistence in establishing a formal channel for prisoner swaps, reviving a Cold War-era hotline. This led to further negotiations, including a proposed trade for Paul Whelan, but these were complicated by Russia's arrest of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, accused of espionage. Russia then raised the stakes, demanding the release of a high-ranking FSB colonel imprisoned in Germany, Vadim Krasikov, in exchange for Gershkovich and Whelan. This request became entangled with the fate of Russian dissident Alexei Navalny, whose death in prison derailed the negotiations. Weiner illustrates the intricate diplomacy involved, with President Biden personally appealing to the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, to release Krasikov, a request ultimately granted after much debate. The prisoner exchange finally took place in Saudi Arabia, securing the freedom of Gershkovich, Whelan, and several other individuals. Throughout these negotiations, Burns also engaged in efforts to mediate the conflict in Gaza, attempting to broker a ceasefire and the release of hostages, facing significant obstacles from both Israeli and Hamas leaders. The chapter emphasizes the crucial role of human intelligence, or HUMINT, in gathering information and influencing events. Weiner recounts how the CIA's ability to cultivate relationships with sources within Russia and other countries proved invaluable. He notes that while technology plays a role, understanding the intentions and motivations of foreign leaders requires direct human contact. The author also touches upon the moral complexities of espionage, acknowledging the need for both the greatest immorality and the greatest morality in protecting national interests. Weiner concludes by reflecting on the dangers facing the United States, including the rise of authoritarian powers and the potential for domestic threats to democracy. He suggests that the CIA, as the infantry of our ideology, must remain vigilant and prepared to defend American values, even if it means operating in morally ambiguous circumstances. The chapter serves as a cautionary tale about the challenges of navigating a complex and dangerous world, and the importance of strong leadership and effective intelligence gathering. And that brings us to the end of our summary of this book. I hope you found it insightful and valuable. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe for more. Your support helps us bring you more great content. Thanks for watching.